Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this month's Digging In with TPS-MTSU. We're really excited to have you join us for this month's topic. So as always, just a couple of quick housekeeping things as we get rolling. Um, for those of you who are able to join us live, first, thank you for taking the time to do so. We really love to have live participation and hope that you can make this as an interactive experience as you would like for it to be. We love to get questions and comments throughout presentations. Please, though, please be sure to keep your mics muted as we are recording this for inclusion on our YouTube channel for folks who would like to view it later. And then again, as I said, make this as interactive as you would like. So we are monitoring the chat box and are happy to take questions and respond to comments as we go throughout the presentation. We do have an ongoing Padlet for this series, which I believe now has 38 entries, which is amazing. So you can go to that Padlet page and find information, links, resources for all of the sessions that we have done in this series. So again, do be sure to make note of that. We will flash this up again at the end with the link and the QR code if you would like to catch that at that point. So with the housekeeping out of the way, I'm going to turn things over to Stacy to kick us off and talk a little bit about our theme for this month.
Thank you, Kira. I'm going to share my screen so we can all take a look at the newsletter. And let me make that a little bit larger. Here we go. So our theme that we are exploring for this month is rights and responsibilities. And this is the same theme as the National History Day competition for 2025. So those of you teachers who are gearing up to do these projects with your students in this current school year, we are trying to explore that topic with you, give you some ideas, and help you through some of those strategies as well. So if you'd like to read more about the National History Day theme, there is a really good write-up on their website that is linked to from our first page. And so they kind of dig into the theme a bit. There's a video overview, and there's a really great theme book that really explores all the different angles that you can take when you're trying to narrow this down, because of course rights and responsibilities is a very, very broad category, and there's many different topics that you can select and pick. And so this gives you a lot of really great ideas, including a write-up, a case study example for Tennessee from our very own Nikki Ward, who's head of Tennessee History Day. So don't forget that the rights and responsibilities both have to be a part of a student's exploration for this project. You can't have one without the other. For instance, voting, which is something that's on a lot of people's mind because we are coming up on an election season, a presidential election season for federal government, which comes once every 4 years. So it's a really good time to talk about these kinds of civic responsibilities in the classroom. But of course, there's so many other kinds of rights and responsibilities that you can talk about as well. So for our awesome source, I picked a voting specific image here, which of course is from the WPA Posters collection, one of our favorite collections. But looking at some of the different rights in the Bill of Rights and kind of equating that with your duty to the people who are fighting for your freedoms in an active war, because this was created in 1943. I just want to show you a few other features of this month's issue before we move into highlighting our lesson ideas. So on page 2, we have, of course, our important links box. And what we did here was we selected from among our lesson plans and some of our other kinds of tools that we have on our website, like the close reading exercise and the I Didn't Learn That guide, that really explore this issue of rights and responsibilities in history. So those are really good examples of that, with lots of primary sources that your students can use in their own projects. And these last 3 links here on the important links box are all projects that are made by members of the larger Teaching with Primary Sources consortium in the country that really kind of hone in on civics education. And they're really fantastic websites that are interactive, and they have lots of great resources. So I would encourage you to spend some time getting to know Voices for Suffrage, Eagle Eye Citizen, and Action Citizen, because those are also part of the Library of Congress's Teaching Primary Sources projects. And then on page 4, of course, we always have additional primary sources. So looking a bit further at child labor law enactment, Native American rights, what's our responsibilities to them? The idea of Puerto Rico being unincorporated and the long story about its relationship to the United States government. And then the idea of our responsibilities as citizens as articulated by JFK in his very famous speech about ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country, and the establishment of the Peace Corps as an example of that. So without further ado, I am going to turn it over to Kira, who's gonna do our first lesson idea.
All right, so let me pull things up here and hopefully get it set up right. So we got a little treat for us as we go through here. So I want to make sure we get good audio. All right. So for my lesson idea, I claimed Fannie Lou Hamer and the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party very early in our conversations. One, because as you guys have probably heard me mention multiple times, civil rights history is kind of my favorite area to study. And also over the summer, I had the opportunity to attend an NEH workshop in Jackson, Mississippi, focused on Freedom Summer and that campaign. And as part of that, had the opportunity to learn more about Fannie Lou Hamer, the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, and really kind of immerse myself in that story. So wanted to kind of share some things that I had learned as we were doing the newsletter. So one, just quick, this image right here is actually from the small park and memorial garden where her and her husband are both buried. And so it's just a really very moving site that I wanted to kind of include the image of. So in thinking about how to get started teaching students about Fannie Lou, about Freedom Summer, you really have to start a little bit earlier. And I was really shocked to see that one, when I look at what is included in the standards for teaching civil rights history in Tennessee, there's not anything specific to the Mississippi story. There are some things, of course, that tie in. So it's important for students to know that Mississippi is a little bit different than the major campaigns that they'll learn about in Tennessee, Alabama, and so forth. One, that Mississippi is the only place where there's actually an umbrella organization called the Council of Federated Organizations, where all of the different national civil rights organizations come together and actually collaborated and work together. Makes it very, very unique. So you have all of the acronyms, the NAACP and CORE and SNCC and SCLC. They were all there, and they actually, again, worked together under an umbrella. The offices for COFO is in Jackson at Jackson State University, and you can actually still visit their main office there. It's recently been preserved and is now a space that, again, tells that story. The other thing that's interesting about Mississippi is that from the beginning, the crux there was always about really gaining voting rights. That really was the driving force behind all campaigns in Mississippi from the beginning. And this, the image there on the right, is actually a source, an artifact that is in the civil rights portion of the To Mississippi Museum. And I found this one really very moving. And really kind of, again, when we think about rights and responsibilities, I think this really speaks to that in talking about, stand up, break the chains of apathy, complacency, and indifference. So again, it is our responsibility as citizens to, to not be complacent, to not be apathetic, and to really fight for our right to vote. And so again, I thought that image is really very, very moving. So again, having some background on kind of the larger story of COFO and what was happening in Mississippi is important, but for our purposes for this lesson idea, we're really focusing on Freedom Summer. And again, while it is not specifically referenced in the standards, you can definitely tie it into some things that are. One, that it is really spearheaded by SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which students are going to be familiar with because they're going to have learned about Diane Nash and John Lewis and the sit-in movements. And SNCC really grows out of that campaign. And it is those students, hence the student part of Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, that are the driving force behind SNCC and the driving force behind Freedom Summer campaign. So there are really kind of four key components. One, that in the work that these students have been doing in Mississippi, SNCC workers have been doing, that they saw that really the country was really ambivalent to what was happening and really just kind of ignored what was happening in Mississippi. And so they thought, how can we make a national campaign and bring attention to what has happened here? So they start recruiting hundreds of volunteers, primarily white college students from across the country, to come to Mississippi to work during the summer of 1964. Part of this was that, you know, they thought the way that they could drive visibility and get the media interested and get the rest of the country interested. So if we bring the nation's children here, then people will pay attention to what's happening. And they wanted to get people to understand the degree of the racial violence and oppression that was happening there. With the primary focus of what they were going to be doing in Mississippi being running voting registration drives and education. The education was primarily done through their freedom schools, which were both school as well as community centers. And then the other thing to come out of this is that they wanted to debunk the myth that African Americans were not interested in registering to vote or being voters. And so in doing so, they wanted to challenge the all-white delegation from Mississippi that would be representing the state at the Democratic National Convention. Because Mississippi, like many other southern states, had an all-white primary. And so, you know, that is really where elections were decided. And so they wanted to show that, again, these people were not the true democratic representation of the state, and so wanted to, again, show that people were interested, primarily African-American people were interested in registering to vote. So with that background laid, it really kind of gets us to Fannie Lou Hamer. And she is one of, I really think, one of the most remarkable people that you can learn about in the civil rights movement. We learn about, of course, Dr. King and Rosa Parks and all these other amazing people. But Fannie Lou stands out to me because here is a woman who was born into a family of sharecroppers. Her and her husband and their children were sharecroppers, and that is what she had done for her whole life. And in 1962, she attends her first mass meeting where she learns that she has a right to vote. And in a place like Mississippi, where it was extremely dangerous to even consider trying to register to vote, that next week, she is one of the people who volunteers to go to the local county seat to try to register. Of course, she's denied. The landowner, again, where she had been working for 18 plus years, learns that she had tried to register and, you know, basically kicks her out of the, you know, the home where she had been. After this, she starts working for SNCC, and that's really what she does throughout the civil rights movement and beyond. Fannie Lou is central to our story because she is the voice that comes out of Freedom Summer and the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party, because she testifies at the 1964 Democratic National Convention about the experiences that she had trying to register to vote in Mississippi, the horrific violence that she had been subjected to, and just the level of oppression that was there. So in the lesson idea, we actually have a clip that I found on YouTube of a portion of her testimony. It's a much longer, the testimony itself is much longer. You can find full recordings of that as well. But for this purpose, we're just going to listen to a small segment. Another interesting thing to keep in mind about this, because, you know, this was being aired on national TV. Her testimony was so powerful that Lyndon Johnson wanted to get her off of national television because, again, there was tons of tension going on within the Democratic Party between the all-white delegation from Mississippi who did not want the MFDP to be represented, did not want their stories told, and then those who were supportive. So just all kinds of tension that's happening within the Democratic Party itself. So Johnson calls it a surprise press conference. The media diverts their attention to what he's talking about. She is, taken off the air. But this kind of backfires on Johnson because then they go back later that night and air the entirety of her testimony on national TV during prime time. So even more people saw it than would have originally. So now let's listen to just a short excerpt of what she had to say.
Mr. Chairman, and to the Credentials Committee.
Sorry, guys.
My name is Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer, and I live at 626 East Lafayette Street, Roosevelt, Mississippi. Sunflower County, the home of Senator James O. Eastland and Senator Stinnett. It was the 31st of August in 1962 that 18 of us traveled 26 miles to the county courthouse in Indianola to try to register to become first-class citizens. We was met in Indianola by policemen, highway patrolmen, and they only allowed 2 of us in to take the literacy test at the time. After we had taken this test and started back to Roosevelt, we was held up by the city police and the state highway patrolmen and carried back to Indianola, where the bus driver was charged that day with driving a bus the wrong color. After we paid the fine among us, we continued on to Roosevelt, and Reverend Jeff Sonny carried me 4 miles in the rural area where I had worked as a timekeeper and sharecropper for 18 years. I was met there by my children that told me the plantation owner was angry because I had gone down, tried to register. After they told me, my husband came and said the plantation owner was raising Cain because I had tried to register. And before he quit talking, the plantation owner came and said, Fannie Lou, do you know, did Pap tell you what I said? And I said, yes, sir. He said, well, I mean that, said, if you don't go down and withdraw your registration, you will have to leave. Said, then if you go down and withdraw, that you still might have to go because we are not ready for that in Mississippi. And I addressed him and told him that I didn't try to register for you. I tried to register for myself. I had to leave that same night. All of this is on account of we want to register to become first-class citizens. And if the Freedom Democratic Party is not seated now, I question America. Is this America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, where we have to sleep with our telephones off of the hook because our lives be threatened daily because we want to live as decent human beings in America? Thank you.
So again, that is just a short excerpt. There's two things I would want to point out to students right off in this. One, at the very beginning, she makes a statement where she is actually from, right? She means not only she like, what town, what city, what county, she gives her street address. And thinking about, again, what people in Mississippi were experiencing by giving her street address, knowing that she could very well be subjected to Klan violence, where they would show up and burn down her house or shoot into her home, like that she had the courage to say, this is who I am, this is where I live, I am here to tell my story. That is extremely powerful, and something that, again, I think it's real easy for us to just completely overlook that, and how powerful that is. The other thing I would want to draw students' attention to, of course, is, of course, she mentions that she's there to become a first-class citizen. What does she mean by that? And have them really think about what she means when she talks about being a first-class citizen. And then the other thing is, she talks, I question America. So she is saying, here I am telling my story, making sure that you all, as Americans, are aware of what is happening to me and others like me in Mississippi. And it is your responsibility now to help uphold the values and ideals of this country. And if you don't, then I question what it means to be American and what it means to be in this country. And so I think that is extremely powerful in thinking about, again, especially that rights and responsibilities part. She's not talking about just her rights and responsibilities, but she is talking about all of those who are listening to her testimony and what their rights and responsibilities are as now recipients of the information that she is sharing. So we have that. And of course, knowing that, again, what they're trying to do is to be seated and to show that they are the true representation for the state of Mississippi. So along with this, there are 3 images that I shared to, again, show, again, the larger kind of pressure campaign that the MFDP is putting on the Credentials Committee at the DNC. So here is the first one. There's 2 of these that show, again, the protesters that set up, and they're outside every day at the DNC, again, waging, again, a pressure campaign. So this one we see, again, kind of the number of people. They all have signs. You can't read all of the signs. But again, I think there's still some good things that students could pick up from this. Just, again, the volume of people that are there. We see the diversity of the people that are there. We can read a few of the signs. You would probably want to point out to students, who are these people right here? So we see 2 images. There's probably a third one right here that we can't see. And of course, this is the faces of the 3 civil rights workers who had been murdered in Mississippi at the very beginning of Freedom Summer. Andrew Goodman, Michael Schwerner, and James Chaney. So we see that there. The other image that we point out, I like this one because, again, we can see the signs better in this one. So again, we have this sign here: 1 million Mississippi Negroes deserve representation. Again, mentioning of, please, seating the MFDP. And then this one right here, again, don't let the deaths of Schwerner, Chaney, and Goodman be in vain. And then the final one, this is actually an image from the National Archives. And this is an image from a church that is in near Canton in Mississippi. And this church had been used as a voting school. Again, kind of teaching people how to register to vote. And it had been destroyed by fire just 10 days prior to when Fannie Lou gives her testimony. So again, showing that violence and oppression is still very much ongoing in Mississippi. And again, could help to, again, highlight, again, what is happening and what the MFDP is trying to bring attention to. Why all this is important, and why I think that it ties in well with our standards, is because in our standards, we talk about the Voting Rights Act, but we talk about it tied into the Selma campaign. And so while that is the campaign that happens immediately before the Voting Rights Act is officially promised, the Freedom Summer is actually what begins that. And it is through the pressure that is happening with the MFDP and all of the organizations that are there, the pressure they put on Johnson during the Democratic National Convention, that really starts the ball rolling for laying a foundation for voting rights legislation. And in fact, it was said over the course of the workshop that I did that Johnson comes out and tells people in his administration, after all of this happens there in August, to begin work on drafting language for a voting rights bill. So that process is started in August, even though, again, we don't get that legislation until the spring of 1965 in the midst of the Selma campaign. So the last thing I want to leave you with is this right here. So this on the bottom of the monument that I showed you in the very opening slide, there are a couple of different quotes from Fannie Lou Hamer, and I thought this one is just very, very powerful. Where she said, "I am never sure when I leave home whether I'll make it back or not. But if I fall, I'll fall 5 feet and 4 inches forward for freedom, and I'm not backing off of it." And I thought that it encapsulates the courage of this woman who, again, faced overwhelming odds and just horrific violence in order to, again, fight for her right to be a first-class citizen in this country. So hopefully that gives you guys a little bit some ideas, things that you can work into, um, into your classrooms. All right. So let me turn things over to Ryder now.
Well,
Thank you.
we should introduce Ryder as being our graduate research assistant with Teaching with Primary Sources this semester, or with History Day. Well, anyway, so this is Ryder's very first webinar with TPS, and so yeah, welcome to Ryder.
Thank you, Dr. Graham. I don't know if I want to follow that great presentation that Kara just did, but here we go. So as Dr. Graham said, my name is Ryder Cowart. I am the graduate research assistant for the Middle Tennessee Regional History Day competition, but I also work with Teaching with Primary Sources on various other projects that we do. This year's theme, Rights and Responsibilities, when I thought of that theme, my mind immediately went to the Great Depression. What rights did citizens have during the Great Depression? What responsibility did the government have to the citizens? So I looked through some of our primary source sets on our TPS website, and I found, oh, I forgot to share my screen. Sorry, hold on a second. Sorry about that. Okay, so I found this picture of the Douglas Dam under construction. The Douglas Dam is located in Sevierville, Tennessee. And I was like, it would be really cool to do a lesson idea on the Tennessee Valley Authority. So Roosevelt's New Deal, the motto for the New Deal was relief, recovery, reform. In October of 1929, the stock market crashed and sent the United States into an economic downward spiral. Millions lost their homes and jobs. By 1933, when Roosevelt became president, the Great Depression had devastated America. FDR was elected as the 32nd president of the United States and vowed to pull the United States out of the Depression. From day one, in the National Recovery Act and the 100-day proposals enacted by Congress and FDR, they promoted economic, agricultural, and social reform. A couple of the government programs that I highlighted in the lesson idea, which is not all of the programs that were enacted under the New Deal, but there's the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, which is FDIC. It was enacted under the Banking Act of 1933, which stabilized the banking system and federally insured deposits. The Social Security Administration, enacted under the Social Security Act of 1935, which was a welfare program designed to allow retirement at age 65 or older while continuously allowing income. The Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC, was a temporary job program to combat high employment by restoring forests and combating erosion. It was primarily only for unmarried young men ages 18 to 24. The Cumberland Homesteads, which was part of the Federal Subsistence Homestead Corporation, which was an experiment in housing and community building for unemployed farmers, laborers, and professionals. The majority of the people who were helped during the Cumberland Homesteads were farmers and laborers, such as miners, or they worked in like textile industries. But there were a few professionals who were out of jobs, like doctors and lawyers. And then, of course, the Tennessee Valley Authority, which was part of the Tennessee Valley Authority Act of 1933. So the Tennessee Valley Authority Act is an act to improve the navigability and to provide for the flood control of the Tennessee River, provide for reforestation and proper use of marginal lands in the Tennessee Valley, provide for agricultural industrial development of said valley, provide for national defense by the creation of a corporation for operation of government projects at and near Muscle Shoals in the state of Alabama, and other purposes, May 18th, 1933. So the Tennessee Valley Authority was needed for hydroelectric power to bring power to rural communities in these 7 states: Kentucky, North Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama, Georgia, and Mississippi. It was also used for flooding control because the Tennessee River would often flood because there was not enough trees to stop the flooding, and then to decrease erosion. Now, one of the things that I mentioned in the lesson plan is you could ask students why it's called the Tennessee Valley Authority if it impacted these 7 states. So to be able to get to that answer, you can do a primary source analysis. This is the tool that you use from the Library of Congress to observe, reflect, question, and then further investigate. And the primary source that I chose is a pictorial map of the Tennessee Valley area. So looking at this map, you can see right here, it starts in Kentucky, and then it follows the Tennessee River down into Mississippi and Alabama, over into Georgia, and then up into North Carolina and Virginia. So when you're looking at this map, you can ask students, it impacted all of these areas. Why is it called the Tennessee Valley Authority? Well, the simple answer is because it's based on the Tennessee River. Another thing that I like about this primary source is the graph at the top. So it shows the changes in the elevation from different areas of the Tennessee River. It also shows dams that are currently under construction, dams that are completed, and dams that are proposed that have not started construction yet. So after you've determined all of the areas of the United States that's impacted by the Tennessee Valley Authority, you can actually go into the act itself. And this is a whole lot of information, so I don't suggest giving all of this to your students. What they would need to know is from right here, where it starts the subsections of the act, and this first paragraph right here on page 2, to be able to answer these questions. What major events prompted the developments of the TVA? Why was flood and erosion control and reforestation the government's responsibility? What rights did the government have to implement this program? And what rights did those affected by the creation of the TVA have? Now, going through the primary source analysis and the act itself, they'll be able to answer these questions, and you'll be able to adhere to standards for 5th grade, 8th grade, and high school as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryder. His very first Digging In webinar, first of many. All right, great. We have one more lesson idea to share with you, and I am going to share my screen so that we can take a look together. Okay, so this one is about the 1796 Constitution of the state of Tennessee. So not quite as not quite as interesting as the TVA and the civil rights movement might be to most of your students, but this, a very important part of our early state history, and I learned a lot, and I've been a lifelong resident almost, and so it's Yes. Okay. So basically, Tennessee, today in Tennessee, we operate off the same constitution that was written in 1870 in the wake of the Civil War, which was our third state constitution. The second one was written in 1834. But the first one, of course, the one that was written, when we were attaining statehood, was in 1796. And so the context for this is that Tennessee, before it was a state, was called the Southwest Territory. It was on land that had originally been part of North Carolina, and so right before this constitutional statehood era in Tennessee, you have all this westward settlement of white settlers pushing across the Appalachians into this territory and coming into a lot of conflict with Native American groups that have been living there. And then you also have the state of Franklin issue, which brought members of future Tennessee into conflict with the North Carolina government. But I'm not going to get into that because that's another lesson plan that we have available on our website. But this kind of would come right after that state of Franklin. And so basically, in order to become a state, Tennessee first had to have 60,000 people in its population, and it had to have a kind of a legislature put together of representatives from the territory. And so looking at the issues of rights and responsibilities, this lesson idea kind of looks at it in two different episodes that are not necessarily related to each other completely thematically, but so there are two different parts to this lesson idea, and you can pursue both of them or either one of them if you're going to use this in the classroom. So basically, the first part is talking about rights and responsibilities of settlers in recognition of treaties that the US government had made with different Indian tribes. And so when you're asking about, well, whose rights and whose responsibilities, we're looking at, well, the rights of the Native American tribes that have been hammered out, and the responsibilities of the federal government to control white settlement such that it respects the territories according to these treaties. And I think we all know that the responsibilities portion didn't really come through because white settlement was pretty inexorable towards the west. And so those treaties were violated by Tennessee's first residents over and over again. But before we get to that, I'm sorry, I skipped over a couple of the links here. I do have a lot of links embedded in this, and I am going to show you some of these are Library of Congress primary sources, but some of these are links to contextual articles from outside websites that I found to be particularly good for giving you, the teacher, a really good overview of the story of this time period. And they were very helpful for me. So in other words, when you click on the very, very first one, the Southwest Territory link, you're going to get to, excuse me, I think I lost it already. You're going to get to a page in the Tipton-Haynes State Historic Sites website. And so we always like to support historic sites across the state of Tennessee because partly they can connect local communities to actual places in the landscape. These are places you can visit where they tell these stories that are, 200 years old. But the Tipton-Haynes State Historic Site is it's a historic house museum in Johnson City where, the Tipton family under Colonel John Tipton settled, and he was very active in the state territorial government and then the state government during this time period of the state of Franklin and the early Constitution. And so his family story is very much tied to this early Tennessee story. And that's interpreted on this landscape here through all these different buildings. And so they have a good website that has some really good research that they make available just through the website. And so this article here about Becoming Tennessee, I found to be very helpful. And as you can see, it's not very long. So you could even have, especially if you're teaching Tennessee history at the high school level, you could even have your students read this as part of an assignment. Okay, so that's the first link. And then these other two links are just to biographies of William Blount, because William Blount was very instrumental as the first governor of the territory that would later become the state of Tennessee. So going back to the issue of the rights and responsibilities having to do with Indian treaties and white settlers, the first primary source that we get to is a letter from Thomas Jefferson to William Blount from 1792. So this is after the whole state of Franklin debacle, but before the Constitutional Convention of Tennessee. This is before Tennessee's ready to apply for statehood. So it's during this time period of increased settlement and an increasing population and a lot of land speculation. So the letter is one of these letters that we are very grateful that the library has transcribed. So you can see on the right is Thomas Jefferson's letter. This is a part of the Thomas Jefferson Papers collection. And he had very nice, neat handwriting, but the ink is has kind of bled on a lot of these documents, making them hard to read. Plus, the cursive might be hard to read for your students anyway, or even for you. I find I have to put some concentration into that. But it's transcribed here on the left, especially you have to click on this image with text, but the link embedded in the lesson idea will take you straight to this side-by-side view so that you can copy and paste it from here if you want into a worksheet, or your students can read it right off the screen. This is just a one-pager. So unlike a lot of these early letters, it's a pretty manageable size of text. So I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I am going to read part of it here that, again, Thomas Jefferson is expressing concern to William Blount, who is the governor of the territory that will later become Tennessee. So with respects to the grants of land made by the state of North Carolina since her deed of cession south of the French Broad River, so this is the Southwest Territory here. I have written to the governor of that state to ask an explanation whether it has been by error or on the claim of right on their part. As soon as I receive his answer, proper proceedings at law shall be directed against the individual grantees to confirm or vacate their grants according to law. In the meantime, I am to desire you to prevent any new settlements being made on those lands in the mildest way which the law authorizes and which may be effectual. So he's like, I need to enforce the law, but not be pushy about it, not be violent about it. I need to gently remind you to follow the law concerning white settlement on these land grants, which are kind of iffy here. So by new settlements, I mean all made since the day of the meeting of the last session of Congress, because the intrusion of those made before that day was stated to Congress and may be considered as under their consideration. I should think, however, even as to those previous settlers, it would be proper for you to require every man to give in his name and a description of the spot of his settlement to prevent new settlers from confounding themselves with them. So not only is this a matter of white settlers, interfering with, Native American lands, but the pace of the settlement is so fast that it's confusing people who are trying to figure out, all right, well, are you actually on a land grant that belongs to you, or is this land that belongs to somebody else? And so that's an issue that might be really confusing for students. So you might just want to kind of water it down to talk about property rights and land rights and settlement rights, and who gets, how do they get these rights, and how do you enforce when these people are violating these rights. So I just thought that Jefferson's tone was a little bit interesting here, how it's a problem, but it's not a problem that they're really eager to kind of fix at the federal level. He is, in 1792, remember, Thomas Jefferson is the Secretary of State in the cabinet of President George Washington. So he's not president yet. Okay, so that's one of the primary sources that you can use. Another one is a map that is so good, I'm pretty sure we've used it in other lesson ideas before. This is from 1795, so it's right before Tennessee becomes a state, and it's really nicely labeled, so it should be, let's see, I'm gonna make it large for a second so that you can see. You can read all the words very easily. It does have some of these tall S's, like this is Pensacola here, which might confuse some students, but that's, once they know what that is, then it should be really easy to figure it out. So you can see here that it actually demarks boundaries of military reservation, and so the lands that belong to the Native Americans, the Indian boundaries, from the boundaries that belong to, the United States at this point. So they're kind of hard to see, especially when you've got like the little dotted lines are public roads and the dashed lines are Indian boundaries. So, it might take a while, but have your students kind of find those boundaries and maybe draw a line over them or trace them on a screen or something like that. And, you can note how some of these boundaries follow natural features in the landscape and some of them do not. And then, of course, you want them to find the city of Knoxville, which is the territorial capital where William Blount has his capital when he is the governor. And so, like, of course, there would be a public road going from Knoxville over to Nashville, which has also been founded around this time. And just kind of have them notice, okay, so where are the where do the Indian lands begin and end, and what does that say about where the white settlement is supposedly limited to? So you can see you've got this Knoxville area here, and then this dashed line actually follows the Clinch River. It took me forever to find that the first time. So it goes up from here, follows the river, and then goes up into Kentucky, follows the river, and then goes down into Middle Tennessee and follows this mountain chain here. So basically it's just this part of Middle Tennessee and then this part of East Tennessee that is open for white settlement in 1795. But of course, you can't see that in the actual landscape when people are actually moving across it. And so that kind of contributes to a lot of confusion as well. Okay, so and then the last of, there's another really great essay that is available here from the Tennessee State Library and Archives. And this is called From Territory to Statehood. And it's a really great informational essay that has links to related primary sources, including the Tennessee Constitution of 1796, which they have there, which they should have there. It's our Tennessee State Library and Archives. So you can show students the original, and then there's a really great kind of historical note describing it. But then it also links to a PDF where you can actually read it without having to read the handwriting. And so this was drafted in the spring of 1796. And the interesting thing was that their Declaration of Rights is actually even more expansive than the United States Bill of Rights, which had been ratified just a few years before. And so to get to the Bill of Rights, you have to go to page 27. All right, and then you can see Article 11th, Declaration of Rights. And so instead of just 10 pieces, there's quite a lot of sections. So first of all, you want your students to notice just how many different sections are included in the basically what is a Bill of Rights for the state of Tennessee. There's 32 of them, as opposed to 10. And so there's one last contextual article that I linked to down here, which is from the Tennessee Bar Association, talking about a short history of the right to vote in Tennessee's constitutions, which provides some really good insight for this, for those of you teachers who want to have a bit more background. But one of the most striking things about this constitution is that all free men who either own a freehold or who have been a resident for a certain amount of time can vote. It does not bar people on the basis of race. So actually, Black men who were free and who were residents or landowners could vote in Tennessee between 1796 and 1834, which is probably something that a lot of your students wouldn't have guessed was the case. That was changed when the Constitution was rewritten in 1834. And I think it's a bit obvious why it was changed. And that's specifically when it said free white men. So that's when that word, the racial designation was inserted into the Tennessee Constitution. And then Black men could not vote until the new Constitution of 1870, the Reconstruction Constitution, of course, for Tennessee. And then women, of course, couldn't vote until 1920. So that's all discussed in this short history of the right to vote in Tennessee's constitutions. And it's actually a really interesting story. So you might actually want to ask your students as well, why do you think that free Black men were given the right to vote in Tennessee's earliest history? How many were there? What's the difference of, the presence of free Blacks in East Tennessee, where most of them would have been at that time? And, how might that have changed when Tennessee becomes a state and gathers more territory and they move more into plantation farming in the early 19th century? So those are all discussions, but this is a good piece of context to kind of launch into talking about, enslavement in Tennessee and enslaved versus free Blacks and, their role in Tennessee history. So that's that one. And I think I'm going to go ahead and cut that one off right now and turn things back over to Kira to wrap things up for today.
Thank you, Stacy. So we've covered from the beginning of Tennessee history all the way to 1964. So lots of different kind of points in history that you can kind of think about when we think about rights and responsibilities. So a couple things to wrap up. So again, just a reminder, if you would like to find the resources, the PowerPoints and such from today's session, they are posted on Padlet. I also add a couple links to some other resources that I looked at when doing research for the Fannie Lou Hamer Freedom Summer, so they're linked there as well. In addition, if you are interested in receiving PD credit for watching this recording, or for those of you who joined us live today, take a moment to fill out the survey here. You can use the QR code. We'll drop the link in the chat box for those of you live. We do complete these and generate these by individually about once a week. So it usually takes about a week to receive these. And I'll get those out to you. And if you haven't had a chance and would like to catch up on some of our past webinars, you can find all of those on our YouTube channel. Again, thank you guys so much for joining us, and we will be back next month on the second Thursday of the month with history as storytelling for our theme next month. So again, thank you guys so much, and we hope to see you then.